You may have spent years wondering why you think, react, or behave differently from the people around you. But what feels strange to you may actually be a pattern psychologists can explain, and it doesn't automatically mean something is wrong with you. In fact, some of the behaviors you've been told are unusual may reveal that your mind simply processes life differently. Let me ask you something that most people are too afraid to ask themselves. Have you ever looked around at the people in your life, your family, your coworkers, your friends, and felt a quiet, aching sense that you are somehow on a different frequency? Not better, not worse, just different. Like everyone else is tuned into the same radio station, and you are picking up a signal that nobody else can hear. You have probably spent years wondering why conversations feel hollow, why you get exhausted by things that seem to energize other people, why you feel the most like yourself when you are completely alone, completely inside your own mind. Here is what I want you to know before we go any further. That feeling is not a flaw. It is not loneliness. It is data, and today we are going to look at that data together, because researchers have identified a very specific cluster of psychological traits. 10 of them that appear again and again in people whose minds are simply wired to operate on a deeper level than the world around them. Most people who carry these traits spend their entire lives misunderstanding themselves, apologizing for themselves, shrinking themselves. This video is for the ones who are done shrinking. Stay with me. Asterisk trait 1. The first trait is one you have probably already noticed, but I want to go deeper than you have gone before. You recharge alone. Not because you dislike people. Some of the people you love most in the world genuinely light you up, but extended social exposure. Parties, group settings, long evenings where you have to perform being present, does not just tire you, tames. There is a difference between being tired and feeling emptied. Most people feel tired after a long day. You feel erased and then you close the door. You sit in a room by yourself. You breathe and something comes back online. Here is the psychology behind that experience. Neuroscientists studying high-complexity cognitive processing have found that deeply analytical minds require what researchers call low-stimulation recovery periods. In simple terms, your brain runs expensive processes. It is reading micro-expressions, tracking tone shifts, calculating intent, cross-referencing everything being said against everything it already knows about that person. That is not socializing. That is work. Profound, exhausting, invisible work and solitude is not you withdrawing from the world. It is you returning to yourself. The tragedy is that a world built for extroverts taught you to see this need as a deficiency, as something to fix, as evidence that something is wrong with you. Someone tells you something and you hear an answer, but your brain immediately asks, why? And when you get that answer, why again? And then again and again. Not because you are being difficult, not because you are anxious, but because your mind has what psychologists call a high need for cognitive closure, and it refuses to accept incomplete information. Most people hear an answer and feel satisfied. You hear an answer and feel a door opening. This has probably gotten you in trouble. People have called it overthinking. They have told you that you analyze too much, that you need to just let things go. And if you have spent years believing them, I want you to hear this clearly. What they called overthinking was actually deep processing, and deep processing is the engine behind every meaningful insight, every creative breakthrough, every moment of genuine understanding that moves humanity forward. There is a study from the University of Michigan that examined what researchers called need for cognition, the intrinsic motivation to engage in and enjoy effortful thinking. People who scored highest on this scale were not just more intelligent in measurable ways, they were more accurate, more nuanced, more capable of holding complexity without collapsing it into something simple and wrong. You live at that end of the scale, to the sense that you will never fully arrive at understanding because every answer opens 10 new questions. But the gift, the real gift, is that you see things other people walk right past. You catch what everyone else misses. You understand at a level most people never reach because most people stopped asking questions 3 steps too early. Asterisk trait 3. This one carries the most pain, because at some point in your life, someone looked at you, someone who just will not commit, and some part of you believed them. I need you to let go of that. Here is what was actually happening. Your brain runs a cost-benefit analysis before it commits to anything. Automatically, constantly. Before you invest your energy, your time, your focus, there is a quiet calculation happening beneath your conscious awareness. Is this worth it? Does this matter? Is the outcome of this effort aligned with what I actually value? And if the answer is no, your system does not engage. Not because you are lazy, but because something in you refuses to spend its most finite resource on something that does not deserve it. That is not a research on intrinsic motivation consistently shows that people with high internal value systems are significantly less responsive to external rewards than the average person. You cannot be bribed into caring. You cannot be pressured into passion. Either something genuinely matters to you or it does not, and no amount of social expectation changes that. The tragedy is that most systems, schools, workplaces, families, are designed for people who respond to external pressure and when you do not respond. The real problem is that they mistook your standards for your ceiling. Trait 4, you know who is hurting and hiding it. You know who is performing confidence they do not feel. You know when someone's words and their energy are telling two completely different stories. You have probably never been able to fully explain how you know. You just do. This is not intuition in the mystical sense. This is what psychologists call high affective empathy, combined with advanced social processing. Your brain collects an enormous amount of nonverbal data, micro-expressions that last a fraction of a second, shifts in vocal tone, the way someone holds tension in their body, the things they choose not to say, and it processes all of that simultaneously, beneath the level of conscious thought. The result is that you often understand people more accurately than they understand themselves, which sounds like a gift, and it is, but it is also a particular kind of loneliness, because when you can see beneath someone's surface, you stop being able to pretend you cannot. You cannot unknow what you know. You cannot unsee what you have seen. And so you move through the world carrying information about people that they have never consciously given you, feeling a closeness that is entirely one-sided, and wondering why real intimacy feels so rare. When things fall apart around you, something unusual happens. You go quiet, not because you do not feel it. You feel everything, often more acutely than the people around you who are visibly falling apart. But there is something in you that steps back from the edge, that studies, that says not yet. Process first, react later if at all. People have probably called this cold, distant, unfeeling. They have wondered why you are not more emotional, not more reactive, not more present in the chaos with everyone else. Researchers studying emotional regulation identify a quality called distress tolerance, the ability to sit with intense emotion without being controlled by it. Most people have to actively practice this. They go to therapy, they learn breath work, they study stoicism, they build it deliberately over years. For you, it has been the default for as long as you can remember. That does not mean you do not feel. It means your nervous system learned, somewhere along the way, to hold feeling without being destroyed by it. That is not. There is a specific kind of person who sits in a room full of their peers and feels, inexplicably, like they are watching children. Not arrogantly, not with contempt, just with a quiet awareness that the things people around them seem urgently concerned with do not reach them the same way. You have probably felt this since you were young. Maybe you found yourself drawn to older people, to deeper conversations, to questions that other kids had not started asking yet. Psychologists who study psychological maturity use the concept of precocious development, not just intellectual acceleration, but a faster than average development of existential awareness. The capacity to sit with questions about meaning, mortality, identity, and purpose at an age when most people are still building the foundation. This creates a specific kind of isolation because the people around you are exactly where they should be for their age. You simply arrived somewhere else first, and you have been waiting quietly for the rest of the world to catch up. Asterisk trait 7. You are haunted by the gap between who you are and who you could be. This one is quiet, but it never goes away. There is not a fantasy, not something delusional, just a clear, steady sense of what you are capable of and a constant, low-level awareness of the distance between that version and where you are right now. Most people do not feel this, or if they do, it fades quickly. They make peace with their limits. They adjust their expectations. They settle. You cannot settle. Not because you are ambitious in the conventional sense, but because something in you refuses to lose sight of what is possible. Psychologists studying high-potential individuals call this the achievement capability gap, and they have found that it is one of the most consistent sources of quiet suffering in people whose actual capacity exceeds what their circumstances have allowed them to express. You are not being hard on yourself. You are grieving the unlived version of your potential, and that grief is real. It deserves to be named. Asterisk trait 8. You find most small talk physically uncomfortable. Not awkward, not boring, physically uncomfortable. Not surface level interaction, weather, weekend plans, empty pleasantries does not just feel hollow to you. It feels like a missed opportunity, like standing at the edge of something real and choosing to talk about nothing instead. Research on what psychologist Arthur Aaron calls need for depth and social connection shows that a significant minority of people have an almost biological drive toward meaningful conversation. For these individuals, shallow interaction does not just fail to satisfy. It actively depletes uncomfortable in silence in a way, not the silence of having nothing to say, the silence of not needing to fill every moment with noise, just to prove you are present. You can sit with someone you care about and say nothing for 20 minutes and feel completely connected. You can spend an entire evening alone, without the television on, without music in the background, without any of the noise people use to avoid themselves, and feel genuinely at peace. This unnerves people because most people are running from their own minds. The silence is where they have to hear themselves, and they do not always like what they hear. So, they fill it constantly with anything. You've already made peace with what lives in your silence. That is not nothing. That is the result of having spent real time with yourself, of having faced the thoughts most people never sit still long enough to confront. It is a kind of courage that does not look like courage from the outside. Trait 10. Last one, and I want to be careful with how I say this. There is a difference between being alone and being lonely. Lonely is an ache, a reaching towards something that is not there. What you feel is different. It is more like standing slightly outside of every room you enter. Participating, yes. Present, yes. But with one part of yourself always watching, always aware that the fit is not quite right. You have found people you like, groups you belong to on paper, communities that check most of the boxes, and still there is that quiet awareness that you are here, but not fully here. That something about the deepest version of you has never found its exact mirror in another person. Researchers who study what they call existential isolation describe this not as a pathology, but as an inherent feature of highly individuated consciousness. The more clearly defined your inner world, you are precisely formed, and precision, by definition, does not fit everywhere. You are not broken because you have not fully belonged. You are precisely formed, and precision, by definition, does not fit everywhere. Every single trait I described today has probably been used against you. Your solitude called antisocial, your depth called overthinking, your selectivity called laziness, your emotional steadiness called coldness, your awareness called paranoia, your silence called strange, your belonging nowhere called a problem to be solved. And the cruelest part of all of it is that the people who said those things were not always wrong about what they saw. They were wrong about what it meant. What they were seeing was not a flaw in your design. It was the design, and once you understand the design, once you stop spending your energy trying to be a simpler, louder, easier, more agreeable version of yourself, something shifts. You stop apologizing for the way you process the world. You stop performing normalcy for rooms that were never built for you. You start, slowly and without fanfare, becoming exactly what you always quietly suspected you might be. Not perfect, not finished, but finally moving in the right direction. If this reached you, if something in here felt like it was written for you specifically, I want you to know that feeling is not an accident. Take care of your mind, it is doing more than you know. Like, subscribe, comment which trait hit hardest. And maybe the reason this feeling is so difficult to explain is because you were never really taught to separate being different from being disconnected. If this reached you, if something in here felt like it was written for you specifically, I want you to know that feeling is not an accident. Take care of your mind. Those two things can look almost identical from the outside, but psychologically, they are very different experiences. You can be surrounded by people and still maintain a strong sense of individuality. You can participate in conversations, build relationships, laugh with people, work with people, and still have an internal world that remains deeply your own. And for someone like you, that internal world is not a place you visit occasionally. It is where a large part of your life actually happens. You process conversations there. You replay moments there. You examine decisions there. You question your reactions there. You question your reactions there. You question your reactions there. And you sometimes understand what you were feeling hours or even days after something happened, because your mind continues processing long after the external event has ended. That is why people may sometimes misunderstand your silence. They see you sitting quietly and assume you have nothing to contribute. They see you taking time before answering and assume you are unsure. They see you stepping away from a crowded environment and assume you are rejecting everyone around you. But what they cannot see is the amount of internal processing taking place behind that silence. And this is where you need to become careful, because when people repeatedly misunderstand a natural part of your personality, you can eventually start misunderstanding yourself. You begin asking, why can't I just be like everyone else? Why can't I enjoy what they enjoy? Why do I need so much time alone? Why do I think about things for so long? Why can't I simply accept things without questioning them? And slowly, without realizing it, you start treating your own psychological needs as inconveniences. You begin overriding your own signals just to make other people comfortable. You say yes when you want to say no. You stay when you want to leave. You force yourself to participate because you are afraid that choosing yourself will be interpreted as arrogance, rejection, or weakness. And this is where something important happens psychologically. When you repeatedly ignore your internal signals, you don't become more normal. You simply become more disconnected from yourself. There is a difference between personal growth and self-abandonment. Growth asks you to expand your capacity. Self-abandonment asks you to erase your needs so other people don't have to experience your difference. Those are not the same thing. If you are naturally someone who needs solitude, learning how to communicate that need is growth. Forcing yourself to constantly socialize until you feel emotionally empty is not growth. If you naturally question things deeply, learning when to stop analyzing is growth. Convincing yourself that curiosity is a defect is self-abandonment. If you prefer meaningful relationships over having dozens of acquaintances, learning how to build those relationships is growth. Pretending to enjoy shallow connections just so you can appear socially successful is something else entirely. And I want you to notice how often society rewards appearance over authenticity. People don't always ask whether you are actually fulfilled. They ask whether you look fulfilled. They don't ask whether your career matches your values. They ask what your job title is. They don't ask whether your life feels peaceful. They look at how busy you are and assume that busyness must mean your life is important. This is why psychologically independent people can sometimes appear unusual. They are less interested in performing the correct version of life and more interested in understanding whether the life they are living actually makes sense to them. And that can create friction, because the moment you stop automatically participating in the expectations around you, people may begin asking questions. Why don't you go out more? Why aren't you trying harder to impress people? Why don't you care what they think? Why are you so quiet? Why do you need so much space? Notice something about those questions. Most of them are not actually asking what is best for you. They are asking why you are not behaving according to their expectations. And there is a subtle psychological pressure hidden inside that distinction. When enough people question your behavior, you may eventually begin defending choices that never needed defending in the first place. You start building explanations for why you need solitude. You explain why you would rather spend a Friday night reading, thinking, creating, walking, or simply being alone, than spending 5 hours somewhere you don't actually want to be. But you don't always owe people a psychological explanation for every preference you have. Sometimes, "This is what works for me," is enough. And the more comfortable you become with that sentence, the more interesting your relationships become, because you begin discovering who actually respects your individuality, and who only liked you when you were easy to access. They miss the version of you that was easier to access. They miss the version of you that was easier to access. The version who never said no. The version who tolerated conversations that exhausted them. The version who constantly explained themselves. The version who adjusted their personality to fit whatever room they were standing in. And when that version disappears, they may tell you that you've changed. They're right, but change isn't always evidence that something has gone wrong. Sometimes it means you've finally started listening to yourself. And this is especially important for people who have spent years being highly observant, because when you notice patterns in people, you also notice how people respond to your boundaries. You notice who becomes offended when you say no. You notice who suddenly becomes distant when you stop giving them unlimited access to your attention. You notice who respects your silence and who immediately interprets it as rejection. You notice who can sit beside you without demanding constant entertainment. And eventually, you stop asking, "How do I make everyone like me?" You start asking a much more mature question: who can I actually be myself around? That is a completely different psychological orientation. The first question makes your identity dependent on external approval. That smaller does not necessarily mean worse. Sometimes it becomes more precise. You begin choosing conversations instead of collecting them. You begin choosing relationships instead of accumulating contacts. You begin choosing environments where your nervous system can actually relax instead of constantly forcing yourself to adapt. And perhaps the strangest part is that this can feel lonely at first. Because when you stop participating in relationships simply because they are familiar, there can be a period where you have fewer people around you than before. That empty space can make you question whether you made a mistake. But psychologically, there is a major difference between the discomfort of losing familiarity and the pain of losing something meaningful. Familiarity says, "I'm used to having these people around." Meaning says, "These people genuinely understand me." Those are not interchangeable. And if you have spent most of your life surrounded by people who knew your behavior but rarely understood your internal world, you may eventually discover that what you were craving was never more social interaction. You were craving recognition, not attention. Recognition. Someone who can disagree with you without turning the disagreement into a battle. Someone who doesn't require you to constantly prove your loyalty. Someone who can sit in silence. That kind of relationship is rare, but rare does not mean impossible. And this is where being different can become less of a burden and more of a filter. Your personality begins telling you which environments fit you and which ones don't. Your energy becomes information. Your discomfort becomes something worth examining instead of something you automatically suppress. Not every uncomfortable feeling means you should leave, but not every uncomfortable feeling needs to be ignored, either. Sometimes discomfort is telling you because the goal was never to convince yourself that everything you do is healthy simply because it is different. The goal is to understand yourself accurately. If you isolate yourself because you are afraid of being rejected, that deserves examination. If you enjoy solitude because it genuinely restores you, that deserves respect. If you avoid every difficult conversation because conflict scares you, that may be avoidance. If you choose not to argue because you understand that not every disagreement deserves your energy, that may be emotional maturity. From the outside, those behaviors can look almost identical, but internally they come from completely different. You cannot understand your behavior simply by looking at what you do. You have to understand why you do it. Because two people can perform the exact same behavior for completely different psychological reasons. One person may be quiet because they are afraid. Another may be quiet because they are thinking. One person may prefer being alone because they feel rejected by everyone. Another may prefer being alone because they genuinely enjoy their own company. One person may refuse to participate because they are apathetic. Another may refuse because they have become extremely selective about where they invest their attention. One person may refuse to participate because they are apathetic. Another may refuse because they have become extremely selective about where they invest their attention. One person may refuse to participate because they are apathetic. Another may refuse because they have become extremely selective about where they invest their attention. One person, and this is exactly where people often make mistakes when judging someone who operates differently. They see the outside and assume they understand the inside, but you know your own internal world better than anyone else ever will. And perhaps your next stage of growth is not becoming more understandable to everyone. Perhaps it is becoming more understandable to yourself. So if you recognized yourself in this video, I don't want you to walk away thinking that being different automatically makes you special. That's not the lesson. The lesson is much more. Maybe you notice things other people miss. Maybe you need meaningful conversations instead of constant interaction. Maybe you are selective with your energy, uncomfortable with superficiality, or simply more comfortable living inside your own mind. None of those things automatically make you better than anyone else. But they also don't automatically make you wrong. The real danger is spending your entire life trying to correct parts of yourself that were never broken. So instead of asking, "Why am I not normal?" You don't have to shrink yourself to make other people comfortable. You don't have to become louder to prove that you matter. You don't have to fill every silence, accept every invitation, maintain every relationship, or explain every decision. You simply need to learn the difference between who you genuinely are and the version of yourself you created just to be accepted. And maybe that's the real power of being different. Not becoming isolated, not believing you're better, not rejecting the world, but knowing yourself well enough that you no longer need the world to constantly tell you who you're supposed to be. So if you've spent years feeling like you don't quite fit, remember this: you may not need to fit everywhere. You need to find the places, people, and experiences where you don't have to pretend to fit at all. And if this video made you understand yourself a little differently, take that understanding with you. Because the goal isn't to become normal. The goal is to become fully yourself, without apologizing for it. If one of these traits described you more accurately than you expected, tell me in the comments which one affected you the most. And if you found value in this video, subscribe for more psychology-based videos that help you understand the patterns behind the way you think, feel, and behave.